November 30th, 2001, a 52-year-old truck painter clocks out of his shift at a factory in Washington and walks toward the parking lot. Before he can reach his car, plainclothes officers surround him, shoving him against the frame of the vehicle and snapping on handcuffs. To his neighbors, Gary Ridgway was an unremarkable blue-collar worker. In reality, he was responsible for the disappearance and murder of between 70 and 90 women over the previous 2 decades. For 20 years, he managed to live a mundane life while his body count continued to climb. This is the story of how he avoided detection for so long and the specific scientific evolution that finally ended his streak. The investigation began in July 1982, when the body of 16-year-old Wendy Lee Caulfield was found floating here in the Green River near Seattle. Exactly 1 month later, 3 more bodies appeared along the same stretch of water. The pattern emerged. The victims were young women, frequently runaways or sex workers, who were murdered with extreme violence and left in the brush or the river. As the public panicked, the Green River Task Force was formed to find the killer. They identified Gary Ridgway as a suspect early on, after witnesses reported seeing his truck near the location where one of the victims was last seen alive. In April of 1987, police collected samples of Ridgway's hair and saliva. Science in the 80s had reached a limit. Without a way to definitively link his biology to the evidence at the crime scenes, investigators had no choice but to let him go. These limitations allowed Ridgway to return to his life and continue his spree. While the task force sifted through thousands of tips, he remained free, hidden by the lack of advanced forensic technology. Ridgway's pathology was rooted in a volatile childhood. His father frequently brought sex workers into the family home, leading to violent domestic arguments. At the same time, his mother severely abused him. Even as a teenager, he was forced into freezing cold baths as punishment for bedwetting. He eventually projected his hatred for his mother onto the women he targeted. During his later confessions, he told police that murdering sex workers provided a sense of satisfaction. He felt he was finally taking revenge for the trauma he suffered as a child. This rage fueled a rigid, dual existence. By day, he worked at a truck factory and went home to his wife. By night, he hunted. He frequently returned to these isolated sites days after the murders to revisit the remains of his victims. His crimes weren't random acts of violence. He followed a systematic cycle, moving between a normal suburban life and these hidden clearings for nearly 20 years. The case remained stagnant until 2001, when investigators revisited the evidence using short tandem repeat analysis. This newer DNA profiling method allowed labs to extract definitive genetic markers from the biological samples Ridgway had provided 14 years earlier. The results provided the breakthrough the task force needed. The DNA from Ridgway's 1987 saliva sample was an identical match to the genetic profile recovered from 3 different victims in 1982. A second piece of evidence tied him to the first victim. Microscopic paint flecks found on Wendy Lee Caulfield's clothing matched the exact chemical signature of a specialized primer used at the Kenworth truck factory, the same factory where Ridgway had worked for decades. Ridgway's methods hadn't changed, but the technology had. He was convicted by forensic capabilities that simply didn't exist when he began his murders. Confronted with the genetic evidence, Ridgway's silence finally broke. Facing a certain death sentence, his lawyers began negotiating a high-stakes legal agreement with the King County Prosecutor's Office. In exchange for removing the death penalty, Ridgway agreed to confess to every murder and lead investigators to the dozens of undiscovered graves hidden throughout the Pacific Northwest. On December 18, 2003, Ridgway pleaded guilty to 48 counts of aggravated first-degree murder. The court sentenced him to 48 consecutive life terms, totaling 480 years, without any possibility of parole. The state chose to spare the killer's life for a specific purpose. It was the only way to recover the remains of missing women and provide answers to families who had spent 20 years in the dark. Now 73 years old, Ridgway lives in solitary confinement. He spends 23 hours a day in a subterranean cell, never seeing the sun or the world outside. For decades, Ridgway relied on the passage of time to protect his secrets. But while he continued his life, the biological evidence he left behind in 1982 remained unchanged in storage, waiting for science to evolve enough to hold him accountable.